Okay, so here we are. We're ready to sew the individual shells together and then assemble those into the cap. You can see the slit at the top. Those mark the center, the two snip marks there. We line those up. You notice I changed fabrics. This is a different fabric. I'll keep changing fabrics throughout. Now you can pin it. Now you can go ahead and keep moving the fabric around and pinning that so that the edges line up. You'll see I'm going to show you here. Put a pin about an inch away, but match up those raw edges. Put another pin in here, and just keep moving and working your way all the way around until you get down to there. You can see right where that'll go, just below that snip mark, about an inch or so. That should be where it ends up. Now you can put a pin in there and then make sure that your fabric kind of gradually eases its way all the way around that edge and pin it. But what I prefer to do is to take it, line it up at the top, like I showed you, line up those two center snip marks, pin it, and what I do is I just move it as I go. The disadvantage is that when you get to the end, sometimes it isn't exactly in the right spot, but you can fudge a little and fuss with it, and I'll show you what I do in order to make it work. All right, so I'll give you a close-up. I'm staying 1/4 of an inch away. On my, this is an old Bernina sewing machine, and on my presser foot, the 1/4 inch is the edge of the presser foot. I think that's true of most machines, but you'd want to check it. See how I'm moving the fabric so that right up where the needle is, under the presser foot, that edge is lining up with the edge of the presser foot. It's 1/4 inch, so you get this 1/4 inch seam, and just keep moving. It's a little tricky. You've got to match it up and move it at the same time and stay the right distance away from the edge, but you'll get the hang of it. Now see, that ended up perfect. You see where it ended up? 3/4 of an inch away from that little snip mark. So that's one side of it done. You can see how the cap is starting to take shape. On the right is that ponytail pouch taking shape. Now normally you would take and flip it over and have your fabric to the left of the needle when you sew, but I like to keep this piece B on top of piece A so that it's moving consistently, similarly to what it did on the other side. So here, therefore the fabric's on the right, which isn't normally how we sew. So same thing, just follow it around, 1/4 inch away, bring it all the way down and around that ponytail pouch. And we'll see where this one ends up. See, this one's a little further away from that snip mark. See, it's like 1 1/8 inch and 1/4. It's just what happens because it's not all pinned in place perfectly ahead of time. But all right, I snipped the threads, and now you come back, and it's a little hard to see on this fabric. When I go and do the next one, you'll see it a little better. But you're going to snip right up to the seam. Certainly don't snip through the seam. But it's only on the inside curve, because when you go to push the seam over towards the inside and do the top stitching, you want to make sure that it's going to lay flat and not pucker. All right, so we're going to do the top stitching. I don't turn it right side out. I work at it. You see how I still have it inside out? And it lays flatter if you do it this way. Now underneath, see, with my left thumb, I'm going to pull it right there. I'm pulling it over to the left. Now you don't have to top stitch, but I'm telling you, if you want your hat to look professional, that is what's going to give it the professional touch. Also, you can press ahead of time, but I found that it really didn't make a difference, and it was an extra step that took time. You know, you could use, if you have a tailoring ham, it works nicely, but you really don't need to. What I'm doing is sewing 1/8 of an inch from the seam, and I just keep reaching under there. I'm feeling with my index finger, I'm feeling to make sure that that seam underneath is facing to the left, and you can run your thumb under there to double check. See, you'll see my finger keeps moving in there just to feel that. Now, as we get to the end, that seam there, you can see the seam is pulled over to the left underneath there. And then back tack, and it's done. And see how nice and professional that looks when you top stitch, especially when you top stitch close to the edge. So now that piece is ready. That shell is finished and top stitched, and we're ready to do the other side. So here's a cute little flower pattern that I use on the other half of this cap. So this is the other shell. Same thing, lining it up, 1/4 inch, close up. Just keep that edge against the edge of your presser foot. Most likely, like I said, measure ahead of time. It's worth taking the time to make sure things are flat and smooth and that you do it right, because it'll look good when you're done. Okay, so move around this side. You can see I have some Sharpie marker on the seam there, but you'll never see that. That's inside the cap when you're done, so it doesn't show. Back tack, see, that's a little bit further from that snip too. That's like 1 inch and 1/8 away. So now this one we're going to top stitch, but here you can see it. As I said, you'll be able to see how I snip right up to the seam. So these little snips will be about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch apart, and on the inside curve. Once the curve starts straightening out, you don't need to keep snipping. I pull on it to see that it flattens or straightens out, and then do the other side. Same thing, inside of the curve. Yep. All right, now it's all set and ready to top stitch. So here again, you're going to flip it, keep it inside out, but then just stitch at it from into the inside, if that's the best way to say it. But you see, it just will lay flatter that way. So now you can see that seam underneath there goes to the left. I keep feeling with my fingers all the way as we go, thumb underneath, feeling, just making sure that that seam is continuing to underneath there, point to the left. And I promise you, I do not run over my fingers at any point here. And the top stitching is done. So there's the other shell finished. Now we're ready to assemble the two. So you'll leave one right side out and one inside out, and then you put the one right side out inside the other one. So the bottom line is you're getting it so that the right sides of the fabric are together. When you go around that opening, you see you've got right sides together and wrong side is facing us here and facing the inside. Match up the slit at the top, that snip mark, come down. Remember, you've got 2 snip marks there on the side that you did when you were cutting out piece A. So there's one, the top one, and there's the bottom one. See, mark it with my thumb, put the pin in there. So that will be on both sides, and that provides an opening for you to turn it right side out. It also, at the top of it is where we're going to put our ribbon. The bottom of it is where the casing will end, the elastic casing. Now we mark this one on the top and the bottom. Now you're going to see how they don't line up very well. See that? Right there. And that happens if you're not, as I said, if you don't pin it ahead of time, but I'll show you how I fix it, and it works out just fine. Important thing here is I'm going to line up these seams on top of each other, and when I do that, flip it over, you can see it even better. You see you've got a lot of purple fabric there where it's not, you know, it's kind of cut at an angle. Now you could go and cut it The flowered one actually slopes down to the right. The purple one slopes down to the left. This is where your elastic casing is going to go, and believe me, when you have it gathered up, it hides a multitude of errors. And so what I do is I'll line the seams up one on top of the other. So underneath is the seam on the purple one, and you see you've got a gap. See how there's a little extra fabric there? So I go ahead and pin that like a tuck underneath there. That takes care of that little bit, and once it's gathered in the elastic goes through the casing, you'll never see it. Now here, you can take a pair of scissors, you can cut some of that off. I cut some off, but look, I hardly cut enough to make it worth it. But I just wanted to show you, you could cut some of that off, or all of it off if you wanted to, but I like to keep the fabric that is there and line the seams up one on top of the other. The purple seam underneath is lined up with this, and now you see I've got a lot of extra fabric there. So what I do is I just take some little tucks in this, and I've got to do it in fast motion so you can just goes quickly, but you see. So when I sew the elastic, the casing, I'm going to stitch around there. I'll just make little folds, and you won't see it once the elastic runs through the casing. So we've got it ready to sew. Now I'm feeling underneath here, and I can see there's some extra fabric in the purple. So I'm making one more little tuck under there. Flipped it over so you can see it better. The tuck is underneath, but of course I like to have the pins always coming from one side and then sew from that side. All right. It's going to be ready here to sew together. So that's where the elastic is on the left, that where the casing is. Here's the two openings, and then we'll sew around that part, which is the top. Now I'm going to expose my free arm. If you have a free arm on your sewing machine, it will make this a little bit easier. I'm going to go a little more than a 1/4 inch here, usually just over a 1/4 inch. You can see it's just on the other side of my presser foot there. And pull those pins out before your needle hits them is always a good idea. Now look, that's where that seam is, and you want to make sure you're to the left side of the seam. Turn the corner, back tack. Now I'm a 1/2 inch at the bottom. I started doing that because I wanted to be sure that all of that seam was encased in it. Sometimes I ended up with thread sticking out and stuff, so I went ahead and did this at 1/2 inch. Come over across one stitch past the seam edge, and then now I'm going to come back over those little tucks. Right up to the bottom one, the bottom of that bottom slit, and back tack. And done there. And now I'll start at the top snip mark and back tack, and I go ahead and do this one at the 1/4 inch, so it's at the edge of my presser foot up to the top snip mark on the other side. Cut the threads. And now before we turn this right side out, we need to trim this seam. First of all, I'll cut some of that 1/2 inch seam allowance about halfway down, trim that out, because that will go inside of your casing, and you don't want it real bulky when you're trying to get your elastic through there. So again, because this is slightly curved, I put some snips in there, especially on the corners. You notice where I had turned, I want to get right up into that corner without snipping the threads. All right, and now it's ready to turn. So I open up one of the holes, doesn't matter which one, reach down inside, and I'll pull the softer fabric. And I've found actually just recently that if you just grab on the right side and shake it, it'll kind of pull itself through. And there it is. Next video we're going to show you how to press it.